Right, moving on. The Central Board of Direct Taxes expanded its evaluation methodologies under the angel tax provision for foreign investors in startups on Friday. Now, the proposed legislation aims to strengthen India's startup ecosystem by providing more liberty to both resident and non-resident investors, resulting in increased global investment in the domestic market. So, how will this impact the startup ecosystem? To answer this question, I'm now joined by Rehan Yar Khan, Managing Partner, Reyes Venture Partners, and Siddharth Pai, Founding Partner, 314 Capital and co-chair Regulatory Affairs Committee at IVCA. Gentlemen, welcome to Startup Street. Siddharth, let me start with you. The exclusions proposed for certain non-resident investors, including sovereign wealth funds and regulated entities, it is a positive move. Does this bring increased funding stability as this opens up opportunities for fundraising for startups?
100%. I think the lack of clarity has actually been very adversarial to the Indian startup system as of now. Investors already taking macro risk, interest rate risk, credit risk, currency risk when they invest into India. Now, having a tax on investments or capital is a risk that I don't think any of them want to take, especially given the macro situation, given how charged it actually is. I think the government's move about exempting the largest funders of the Indian startup ecosystem, your sovereign wealth funds, your larger financial institutions overseas, university endowments and the like is actually good. And even for investors or even for funds, they said broad-based funds with more than 50 investors. Now, the problem actually lies in that classification of broad-based funds with 50 investors. Does this entail that every foreign fund manager has to give his list of investors or LPs to the tax department as well as their commitments, who's done what? Does it actually mean that the ability to actually create SPVs and use blocker vehicles actually goes away? So I think that classification on the investor part is something that is actually created greater amount of ambiguity. The industry is, of course, reaching out to the department to seek clarity, but the greater clarity we get, the earlier we get, the quicker we can go back to the pre-April 1st, 2020 rules, where angel tax only applied to Indian residents and non-resident investments could actually come in. Because they provide more than 85% of the funding for Indian startups. Sure. And this funding can greatly be alleviated by that, that clarity.
Okay, let me now quickly go to Rehan. Rehan, a welcome move by the startup ecosystem. The proposed norms aim to expand valuation methodologies and eliminate price differentials between resident and non-resident investors. What do you make of this?
Yeah, well, it's a welcome move from the sense that it's better than what it was a few weeks ago, which was worse than what it was a few months ago. But in that sense, so I mean, earlier they just kind of, there was all this ambiguity about what would happen with international investors. And now that these, methodologies have come, and especially the one where they have said that the FMV, the fair market value, can be ascertained based on the investment of an AIF, right, or one of the other sort of institutional investors, and the angel portion can be linked to that. I thought that made it very simple. Because typically, when the angels invest, they sort of invest along with these rounds, so that makes it easier. Having the multiple ways of ascertaining that valuation, that also makes it easier. This 10% variance makes it easier.
Yes.
So I think it's a way forward. See, the CBDT is obviously concerned about certain things. That's why they've come up with this. But they seem to have now taken the perspective of our community on board, and they've come up with this. So it's a welcome move.
Okay. Siddharth, coming back to you, something that Rehan just mentioned, deeming value at which funds are raised from certain prescribed non-residents as the FMV is an interesting proposition, as it also aligns with the FEMA provisions which permit raising funds from non-residents at a value higher than the certified FMV as per internationally acceptable valuation methodologies. So Siddharth, tell me, how does this further bolster the ecosystem?
I think this is a fantastic move in terms of ease of doing business. India was unique in the sense that we required 3 different valuation certificates by 3 different valuers using 3 different norms for the same transaction involving the same investors in the same company. So I think by actually harmonizing it as of now and allowing for a greater variety of valuation methodologies, along with the 10% variation and the price matching, I think some of the financial engineering that unfortunately had to be undertaken to be compliant with laws will hopefully end up actually going away to a large extent. So it's an easy doing business move. But I think the question now is, what are the valuation methodologies they're going to bring up?
Exactly. Is there any clarity, Siddharth, on the 5 new valuation methods that are being unveiled by CBDT?
I honestly don't know, because as an industry as well, especially in the early stage, even noted valuation experts like Damodaran has said, it's impossible to value an early stage venture which doesn't have an operating history and where business can actually change month on month itself. So if the tax department has new ways of actually helping us do our job, I think all of us in the industry are excited to actually see this, but hopefully they do actually align to some of the more internationally accepted valuation methodologies the way RBI does. I think RBI did a fantastic progressive move to actually keep it driven by market forces. If the tax department employs the same, I think we will have harmonization and greater ease of doing business, greater capital flows as well.
Rehan, what do you make of the provision to account for forex fluctuations, bidding processes and economic indicators is a significant step towards managing the unpredictability in the value of unquoted equity shares, especially in this kind of an environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that they've sort of accommodated for that because, that eliminates the risk of the taxman, taking a certain strict view, right? So they've kind of put it in here. We'll have to see to what detail they spell it out because, the risk that you continue running is that your assessing officer at that particular time, disagrees. So, the more black and white this thing is, the better. Because as you know, the tax code is implemented through assessing officers and they can all have a different view. So yeah, it's a welcome move that they put that in.
Okay. So that similar question to you, a safe harbor of 10% to provide for variation in value on account of forex fluctuations and, variations in other economic indicators. It's a considered move in these dynamic market conditions. So first, your thoughts on that, and B, in terms of policy asks, is there something that needs to be done further to strengthen the ecosystem?
No, 100%. I think the 10% variation is good because previously what will happen is a round ends up taking at least a quarter to close. So people used to get valuation methodologies for a difference of a couple of weeks due to currency variations and the like. 10%, I believe, is sufficient to actually take care of any movements, larger swing movements that may happen during your financial closure period. I think from a larger extent, what the ecosystem would really like to have is to actually have objectivity when it comes to how the assessing officer views this. I do agree with what Rehan said. Even under 56(2)(7)(b or angel tax, it's actually at the discretion of the assessing officer to accept your valuation report or not. Given that sort of unmatched power that the assessing officer still has and continues to have, even under all these particular changes, how would they actually end up looking at some of these new changes that are made? And would that actually change their mind? Is a big question that is yet to actually be answered. So if the CBDT can actually issue operating guidelines of how they should actually take these kind of cases, and the industry, as IBCA would love to contribute to that, I think that would go between allaying fear across the industry.
Okay, so again, same question, Rehan. My final question to you, is there something that needs to be done further to strengthen the ecosystem? Also, by when do you see the stress in the ecosystem settling down, funding winter, cost pressures, layoffs? 2023 hasn't been a bouquet of good news so far.
Listen, there are a lot of asks, right? And I think, the big one which Sid and I and everybody at IBCA has been talking about is, enabling the domestic capital ecosystem in order to reduce dependence on the overseas ecosystem because, then you're sort of, in their boat and that increases your risk. So, there are a lot of things in there, like everything from tax parity to, getting, insurance company, to invest more, to getting provident funds to invest more.
Sure.
So a lot of these kind of things come under the umbrella of enabling the domestic ecosystem.
Okay.
And, this is a major imperative and it's getting more and more every time these funding winters come. I think to myself that, hey, if you had a larger domestic ecosystem, this would have, substituted for some of that foreign capital, which has evaporated. And that's what you're seeing in the public markets, right?
Yes.
If you see the public markets, what happened was over the last decade, or rather decade and a half, because we had such a robust mutual fund industry and domestic institutional industry, now our markets are quite stable. When foreign investors have been withdrawing, these guys have been sub-buying.
Okay.
And
Rehan,
it's done
I'm
well, right?
so
we need
sorry.
to see that
Yeah, Rehan, I'll have to cut you because we've completely run out of time. But many thanks, both Rehan and Siddharth, for joining us on the show today. It was an absolute pleasure talking to the both of you. With that, it's time for a short break. Up next, Power Your Own Research has secured $4 million in a seed round by Castle Island Ventures. We speak to the co-founder, Krishna Hegde, to understand how the company plans to use these funds. Stay tuned.